It's not a classic injury where you're missing an arm or a leg.
Of course, I had the headaches and nausea at first.
I couldn't really remember too much.
Very bad balance.
So whether it's combat or a sport activity, how quickly do you go back?
Change the culture with this and attack the stigma.
We have now more technology, more understanding, more insight.
For most people, the stresses and strains of being on a street in a city like Washington, D.C. is routine and manageable. But for some combat veterans, it can be just as daunting and confusing as an ambush in Afghanistan. An increasing number of veterans returning with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury means that every day could be a never-ending battle with an inner enemy. Improvised explosive devices have been one of the most common weapons of insurgent forces in the post-9/11 combat zones. And as more and more service members have been subjected to multiple blasts, TBI and PTS have come to be regarded as the signature injuries of the current conflicts.
It's been an eye-opener to us to see just how common it is. We think that as many as 15 to 20% of our returning soldiers, for example, have experienced a traumatic brain injury. 80+% of that is a mild variety.
Brigadier General Richard Thomas leads a group that pushed new protocols into place in the Army in 2010. Quick medical evaluation of all personnel subjected to explosions is now required. The increased attention has led to a big increase in the number of diagnosed cases, from about 12,000 in 2005 to almost 29,000 in 2009. Mild, moderate, or severe, the symptoms of TBI can persist for years.
The main obstacles that I had to overcome, which are pretty much consistent with every other TBI patient that I've met, are some serious attention deficits and memory problems, both short-term and long-term.
No recollection of much, not able to do anything on my own, and very bad balance. And I also could not talk.
And I had lost some vision a little bit. Also from my memory, I couldn't really remember too much, but it had came back like I had lost pretty much my whole vocabulary. I couldn't speak at all.
You just have problems with people. You have problems with how you react to questions, how you talk to people.
If I was talking on the phone and my wife said something to me, both conversations would just end. I wouldn't hear anything until I would reset myself, probably the best way to put it.
It's a horrible way to live if you can't remember what you got sent to the store for, and you come back and they go, oh my God, what is this? I mean, you're not 90 and you're not stupid.
Successful treatment requires the expertise of multiple specialists.
This is not a problem that can be addressed by one medical specialty. It's important that you have physical medicine and rehabilitation docs involved. It's important that you have neurologists. It's important that you have neuropsychologists. It's important that you have nurses and physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech pathologists and social workers. A whole range of disciplines are needed to adequately address the issues in these patients.
Most TBI patients have had their brains bounced literally. Shock waves or accident impact slams the brain against the inside of the skull.
There has to be a force of sufficient severity to cause some change in the brain. The brain sort of switches off. They don't quite have the same level of alertness. They may not remember things for a brief period of time. They may be knocked unconscious.
And that sounds a lot like what's been happening on the football field for years. Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young, renowned for his many touchdown passes, also was a hard-nosed runner. His career, like that of many other pro football players, was shortened by concussion, another term for mild traumatic brain injury. He had 7. There are similarities between the repeated physical pounding experienced by players in the NFL and repeated exposure to IED blasts. Almost everybody wants to get back on the field or back into the fight, and it's common to think you've just been dinged a little.
These are men and women that are like elite athletes. It's a morale issue, it's an issue of ethics, and that's one of the hardest things. They don't want to be left behind. But sometimes it's better to sit it out so that you can heal and fully recover so you can be deployed at a later date.
Dr. Richard Ellenbogen, a former head of neurosurgery at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, co-chairs the NFL's Head, Neck, and Spine Medical Committee. The Department of Defense and the NFL have been sharing information on TBI. This Johns Hopkins University conference in Washington, D.C. included team doctors and trainers and military personnel.
As we have developed our revised in-theater guidelines for managing concussion, it was informed by many of our discussions with the NFL, and as the NFL revised their management of guidelines for concussion, it was informed by some discussions they had with the DoD.
Merrill Hodge is another pro football player whose career was ended by concussion. A hard-nosed fullback, he was never knocked unconscious, but he stopped breathing in the locker room after his second severe head trauma over the span of just 5 weeks. Now a TV sportscaster, he understands the desire to get back in the game.
You're never going to change that mindset. You always want to have that desire to get back out on the field, get back on the front line. I mean, that passion is what allows you to be successful. So you don't want to diminish that passion. You just want to have that educated passion.
In the Army, part of that education is a mandatory medical examination after an explosion, rather than waiting for individuals to volunteer that they don't quite feel right.
If you're within 50 meters of a blast, for example, whether you're in a vehicle or a building, within 50 meters of a blast, you must be evaluated, and you must have a medical evaluation at that point. If you have a direct blow to the head, whether that's doing training, whether that's from combat, motor vehicle accident, anything, a direct blow to the head, you must have a medical evaluation.
There we go.
Sergeant First Class Lyle Spurgeon, a combat engineer for the Wisconsin National Guard, was severely injured when an RPG penetrated his vehicle during an ambush in Afghanistan. He's undergoing virtual reality therapy for his TBI.
We were route clearance patrol, so explosions were commonplace, and every time there was an explosion, anybody that was within a 100-meter radius of the explosion, Doc, our medic, had to, I can't remember the name of the test, but he had to give him a test, and it was every time. As soon as he had the opportunity, we were doing those tests, and it kind of got to be old hat, but they were serious about the TBI over there.
Just saying shake it off and get back in the game, or in our case, get back in the fight, is not always the best solution. We want to make sure that you're fully functional when you go back into the fight.
Welcome to Walter Reed's computer-assisted learning environment, better known as Karen. It's a sophisticated virtual reality room. Traumatic brain injury patients like Sergeant First Class Lyle Spurgeon can relearn routine tasks that have become difficult.
It has a motion platform and an embedded treadmill that are synced up with a virtual environment displayed on a curved screen in front of the patient.
It's also got a harness so patients are supported even if they stumble or lose their balance during a session. Physical therapist Carla Alexis calls it the walk and chew gum room.
This allows me to push the triggers better than in the community. It used to be that maybe I would take them in the hallway on the 3rd floor, but again, that's not real world. Here on post, it's not the full real world.
It gets easy for a soldier to get used to being waited on hand and foot by your family and friends. And it takes somebody like Carla to put their boot in your butt and say, hold on, you need to start doing stuff for yourself.
Sergeant First Class Spurgeon suffered devastating injuries during an ambush in Afghanistan.
And RPG came through the hull of the vehicle, All the shrapnel that it drug with it struck me on the left side of my body. In my eye, put a scar on my face, my arm, my leg, and then, of course, the blast disrupted a lot of my hearing.
And he was left with TBI. Karen can put him through a variety of environments that challenge his brain, walking through a park, crossing a rope bridge.
I don't like it much because it tends to make me a little bit dizzy, but it's probably about as real as you'll get to walking on a rope bridge without actually having to walk on one.
Usually he does head turns where there's a red ball showing up on either side, and we've increased the speed with which he has to turn his head as he's walking, and he's been able to maintain a pretty straight course of walking.
In another application, he guides a boat through a slalom, shifting his weight as though on a surfboard. This one even gets turned into a competition between patients. Another involves walking through a wooded area, swatting birds and butterflies that fly at him, all while trying to stay on the path.
And every time I go in there, it's a little bit more difficult. This time the terrain was a little bit more difficult for me, so having to navigate the up and down and then plus watch the birds and the insects and try to hit them at the same time. It's just they continually kind of force you to go forward.
It encouraged him to compensate for the lack of visual field that he has in his left eye from shrapnel damage, and it made him continue to have to walk and move and compensate in a dynamic environment, uneven surfaces.
There's a virtual urban environment. Sergeant First Class Spurgeon has been fighting his inner enemy out in the real urban environment.
It was where I would have to walk up against buildings and stuff to steady myself when I'd walk down the street, because I come from a pretty low populated area, and then walking here in DC, I want to know what's going on around me. Plus coming from Afghanistan too, you know, you kind of always have a heads up attitude over in Afghanistan.
His review of virtual reality?
It's helped me with being able to divide my attention between things. I still have some problems with some balance, but it's helped me out with that quite a bit. Oh yeah, just like DC. I've got to get my magic book out.
He has another problem common to TBI patients, memory lapses. Part of the treatment, write things down.
Oh, I better put that down. When you write it down, you tend to remember it better. And also you have something, you know, got a reference to go back to if you can't quite remember exactly what it was. Good stuff. I always say if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen.
The information comes in and sails right on by. And when that's happening, these are about the last people you want running a 70-ton tank through a community or driving a 6-ton truck out on a freeway.
Dr. Bedford Boylston is a combat surgeon and a TBI victim himself. He finds the Brain Fitness Center one of the best therapies around for him. It's a voluntary program outside the regular treatment regimen.
Are you ready to flex your powers of observation?
Just like someone might go to physical therapy 3 or 4 times a week, but then be able to go to the gym and work out on their own, we wanted to provide that same type of experience for the traumatic brain injury population or anyone complaining of difficulty.
The center relies on commercially available software, much of it originally developed for Alzheimer's patients. But those patients who come here are mostly young, like specialist Matt Katka. He was also severely injured in an ambush in Afghanistan.
I had been shot in the side of the head, so the bullet had just come like right through the left side, just didn't even touch the helmet, just went right through, and then took off the back part of my head. I was like, wow, that did not feel good at all. So I started yelling to my friend. I was like, dude, I just got hit, I think. And he's like, I can't hear you. So I was trying to yell at him, but because we were getting shot at, no one could hear me.
Doctors induced a coma in Afghanistan. He woke up in Germany and couldn't remember most of his vocabulary.
They'd ask me, like, what's the pain ratio? And the first word that I had heard when I was like, pretty much in bed was 2. And I was like, oh, it's 2. But I really was like a 9. It was really painful. But they'd be like, oh, you're fine. I'm like, no, it hurts really bad. But I couldn't tell them that. So finally they found out that, TBI, my traumatic brain injury.
Specialist Katka is using the brain gym, as it's sometimes called, to get him ready to apply for college. Dr. Boylston thinks it's helping him regain his mental focus.
What they do in about an hour's time, 2 modules, will wear you out for the rest of the day mentally. It's as tough as any kind of, mathematical test I took at Harvard or any kind of organic chemistry I took there.
And Specialist Katka, like so many TBI patients, has trouble with his memory.
I have to write it down, and if I do that, I'm fine. So it's just, I can't really remember. If someone says it like right there, like just remember it, I'm like, okay, probably won't.
Most people normally function with 4 to 6 variables easily, and that's phone numbers and things along those lines, going to the grocery store, appointments. Theory of brain plasticity, which says that a brain can always adapt and can always rewire, that if you couldn't do more than 1 in 6 variables, there's something really wrong here.
Every exercise and the computer games are based on sound neuropsychological exam or different type of therapy goals. So there's nothing that we're providing that isn't based in some sound theoretical research.
The National Intrepid Center of Excellence, dedicated in the summer of 2010, houses the most advanced technology in the country for treatment of TBI and psychological health problems among service members and vets. At a preview of the facility, Dr. Gerard Reedy spoke of the difficulties of diagnosing TBI, particularly mild TBI.
Most of the wounded warriors coming back with TBI show no abnormalities on routine brain imaging. This is a problem. Yet we know there's damage below the surface. We just can't see it. We know they have persistent deficits and symptoms in their daily lives.
NICO, as the center is called, also has some of the most advanced brain imaging technology anywhere. Some techniques like diffusion tensor imaging can help identify TBI.
The normal MRI system that you would get, say, at a base is about 750 images, and it primarily looks at brain structure. Ours is 41,000 images and looks at brain structure, brain chemistry, brain wiring, brain function, and blood flows.
Doctors are learning more and more about how complex the treatment of traumatic brain injury needs to be. The inner enemy attacks on multiple fronts.
Memory problems are clearly in the top 5 complaints of what we see in our patients, but they're dwarfed by the number of patients who are reporting sleep disturbances, dwarfed by the number of patients that are reporting headache. It's right up there with the number of patients that are reporting dizziness and other things too. We have to address all of these things.
The National Football League hardly seems the place for a kinder, gentler attitude towards physical contact, but times are changing. There's a new cautious approach developing over how to handle players who've sustained concussions, mild traumatic brain injuries.
30 years ago, we said a concussion had to be loss of consciousness. Now 90% of concussions, there's no loss of consciousness. And the DOD is really shedding a lot of light on A, how to recognize the effects of these injuries, and B, how to treat them. And we're taking a page out of their book.
During the 2009 season, key players like Philadelphia's Brian Westbrook, Washington's Clinton Portis, and Buffalo's Trent Edwards, among many others, suffered concussions. By rule, players are barred from returning to the games in which they received a concussion once a doctor's diagnosed them on the sidelines.
Their ability to require a neurological specialist to evaluate a player before being returned to a game following a concussion that may have been inspired in some way by the military's policy of having a medical provider evaluate someone before returning them to duty.
On a USO tour, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell had a chance to talk with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen.
When I asked him some of the key issues that he was facing, One was obviously troop morale, but the second was head injuries and how to deal with those head injuries in a responsible way. And I offered to them that we would love to work with them and share the information that we have gathered and the research that we have done over the last couple of decades.
Military and NFL medical personnel are now sharing information and educational opportunities, like this Johns Hopkins University-sponsored conference on TBI. Medical studies have suggested an exceptionally high rate of brain-related problems among retired pro football players. Among them, early-onset Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It's theorized that that's because of the repeated physical pounding the players took during their careers.
This knowledge has really informed the DoD in revising their guidelines to deal with recurrent concussions.
Among other things, the Army now requires that anyone within 50 meters of an explosion be examined and cleared by a medic. Former Pittsburgh Steeler and Chicago Bears fullback Merrill Hodge suffered 4 diagnosed concussions, the last 2 within 5 weeks of each other. He stopped breathing in the locker room. He obviously recovered, but he developed a whole new attitude about the urge to get back into the game.
It's not that you've had the head trauma. It's that when do you re-enter, or when do you go back into whatever it is, whether it's combat or a sport activity. How quickly do you go back, and are you ever cleared, and are you ever evaluated? If you're not cleared or evaluated, well, there's all kinds of dangers and risks.
Because of the risks, pro football has developed a whole new set of rules and guidelines that restrict how soon a player can return to the field.
So there's a sea of culture change. We got to change the thinking of our athletes and our soldiers that it's okay to sit it out until they can recover.
Similar changes are being promoted in the Army. Brigadier General Richard Thomas, the Army's Assistant Surgeon General, says one of the goals is to remove the stigma that often prevents soldiers from seeking treatment for unseen wounds, their inner enemy.
This is going to be a process. Again, we're looking at affecting a cultural change, and that's a difficult, at best, maneuver. I mean, you don't have any problem if you hurt your knee to come seek medical care, but we want them to feel the same way if they have a concussive injury, or if they're showing signs and symptoms related to post-traumatic stress. We have good treatments available to them.
That's a medical role in
Team River Runner is an all-volunteer organization with chapters across the country. They've got one goal, and that's provide wounded warriors the opportunity to go kayaking on a river. It's not part of an official treatment program, but for the active duty service members and veterans at this session, it's therapeutic. Brian Eisenhower, a former Air Force supply sergeant, was injured in a car crash while stationed in Italy. Chip Sells is a former executive officer for an Army forward surgical team in Iraq. They have in common their love of these kayaking excursions, as well as their traumatic brain injury. TBI patients sometimes say they feel like they're in a boat when they're on land. Since kayaks do have a tendency to roll, Brian says the experience has helped him with his balance.
I spent most of probably a month and a half to 3 months upside down before I was able to maintain uprightness.
Former Marine Staff Sergeant Donald Lang is still recovering from multiple battlefield injuries. At first, he was skeptical about kayaking.
For beginners, it's always in the back of your mind that, maybe you could drown. That's extremely rare, but, it's something that a beginner thinks about, and it has a tendency to help that damaged brain focus as well. So, as an adventure sport, kayaking has been invaluable in helping my damaged brain learn how to learn again.
For Chip Sells, kayaking provides a sense of release. He was severely wounded in a mortar attack on his field hospital.
I was with a group of about 22 people that got injured at the same time. So, it was pretty big traumatic event. You have a lot of your friends get hit, and then it's like your whole world changes.
Kayaking has become a major therapeutic outlet for all three men.
It gave me my confidence back. It gave me a new sense of purpose, and it's freeing. It lets you enjoy life again.
Kayaking, more than any other type of therapy that I've been involved with, helped my brain learn to learn again.
Oh, it's a wonderful form of therapy. It combines all your muscles that you don't believe you had, just pretty much able to stay upright more so now.
But not all the time. He came off the river soaking wet.
Well, that's because I tried to roll and couldn't pull it off today.
Just because somebody looks like they don't need any help, that they don't have terrible injuries, doesn't mean that they don't. You know, they served overseas. They went through probably multiple traumatic experiences, and you know, if they just owe up to that and say, hey, you know, I need a little bit of help, it'll help them in the long run.
Brigadier General Thomas is on board with that.
They are injuries. It's not okay to shake it off. Let's take a real look at you. Let's get you a medic to take a look at you and see really where you are. Are you able to function as I need you to? Can you perform as advertised as a soldier? That's the issue. Part of our training with traumatic brain injury also, we encompass some training with post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, because they are injuries also. And that's a different way of looking at it. Now that's an evolution.
Well, there's clearly a will to change attitudes within the military about injuries like TBI, but the ultimate goal is to restore service members to their full effectiveness, both out in the field and right here on the street. I'm Staff Sergeant Josh Hauser. Thanks for watching Recon.